Hey guys, my name is VaulSC, hope that you are doing well. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the recent update for Conquest, The Last Argument of Kings by Parabellum. It's my favorite tabletop war game at the moment, and just this week they have finally come out with a whole raft of changes to the base game and to all of the factions, and they have also released a new faction called Sorcerer Kings. We have seen previews of the models. They are there for pre-order, and a lot of them is on Army Builder now to see all of the rules. I'm not going to be covering Sorcerer Kings in this particular video. I'm going to be doing everything else, the other factions, the other game changes, just because I'm not yet ready. I'm not qualified to talk to you about Sorcerer Kings because I haven't just studied them. I haven't really read up on all of their rules and play tested them or anything. So you can get that elsewhere on YouTube. I'm going to be focusing on everything but Sorcerer Kings. This is effectively a follow-up to my wishlisting video that I did a few months ago, really putting out there my ideas about how they should be changing the game, and effectively, now that we can see the updates, we can go through it. So it's going to be more of a top-down sort of high-level analysis, and I don't mean high-level in the sense that I'm playing the game at the highest level. I mean in terms of the broader overview of things, and then I'll go into some of the details, but I'll be picking and choosing. There are some factions that I understand better than others, so I'm just generally giving you my overall thoughts and feelings, and we'll cover off a bit of detail as we go through, okay? Alright, so if you guys only take one thing away from this video, I just want you to take this one overall point away, and that is that I am very happy with the update. I think it's amazing that the level of attention they've put into the rules changes, and the fact that they've addressed community concerns. They've taken the things that were problematic with the game, the regiments that were too powerful, and they've nerfed them a little bit, but not sort of crushed them into the ground where you can't play them anymore. They've looked at some regiments which weren't seeing any play at all, and they've buffed them a little bit, and they've changed some of the rules to take them from being less interesting to more interesting, and giving us some new strategies to think about. And honestly, it's just, it feels surprising to me because if you guys didn't already know this, I've been playing a different tabletop war game called Infinity by Corvus Belli for the last 8 years. I've got to the end of my tether with that game. I'm in the process of selling my armies. I eventually got to the point where I felt like the developers of that game were treating their, game system and effectively our hobby like a toilet. They were just really refusing to make even any positive changes, and they were just making the game worse, to be honest. So it's just bizarre for me to play a different game and to have the developers in the Discord and communicating with us and answering rules questions, and it seems like they're playing the game themselves, and they're actually addressing the regiments that needed to be nerfed. They are being nerfed, and the ones that needed a buff, well, they are being buffed. So to me, that's just shocking. And I've got to say, if there's anybody watching this video who is sort of on the fence about Conquest, like the look of the minis, the rules seem interesting, but you're not sure if you want to shell out all that money, you're not sure about the community, I just want to say that you've got the thumbs up from me personally. I recommend this game, and I recommend it not just because the good models and the good rules, but the number one thing that I like about it is the developer support that has been shown every few months. There is a bit of an update where the game is moving in a positive direction rather than going backwards, and that is why I play this game and will continue to. As soon as they stop doing that, that's when I'll question my commitment to the game and possibly pull out, but in the short term, I certainly can't see that happening. Things going very, very well, so I've just got to give props to them for that. I will be very critical of them in this video by covering off a lot of changes that I didn't agree with, and sort of addressing some things where they could have changed the game in XYZ ways and didn't. That is just part of my role as a YouTuber, the way I see it. If I analyze the game, I got to give you guys the truth, and I've got to, cover off everything, and I don't want to give you guys a one-sided puff piece opinion where I'm just sort of talking them up. Overall, I'm very happy with Parabellum and with Conquest and what's been happening, but it's just the nature of this kind of review video where I'll be a bit more complex than just that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, guys, and hopefully you enjoyed this disclaimer. Let's just minimize the cam, and we are going to go and just work our way through this list. I haven't covered off the top part of this. We just want to get straight to the good stuff. Okay, so the thing about retinues is that they're essentially saying there were some characters in the game where you almost always had to take retinues for them to be important, and there are other characters where you just never would take them. If I'm looking at a faction like Dwegum, you'd typically take the Tempered Sorcerer on foot, and you'd add the retinue to have Arcane 1, maybe Arcane 2 and 3, and that's the way you'd play it. And there'd be some characters where you just definitely wouldn't take it, and they felt like it was a bit of a no-brainer decision. I didn't really agree with that, to be honest. I found that in my list building, I was actually seriously considering whether to add a retinue for all of my characters or not, and there was a lot of room for improvement there. My personal preference would have been for them to simply make retinues better by looking at each individual retinue option and tweaking it a little bit. For example, the no-brainer Arcane 1 spellcaster effect of having an additional dice, I would have just made that a higher tier, so you've got to put other things if you want it, and just redesign it a little bit. But for them, for whatever reason, overall with design space and making sure that they have an easier time updating their game, they've decided to remove it and basically move some of the things that were available in character retinues over to the characters themselves. And in doing so, they have actually made some characters a bit weaker. Like this Tempered Sorcerer can now no longer get the thing that gives it just +1 dice, but you can still take Focused, for example. There are some characters where, the bonus for the character was simply built into it. So if I go to Wadroon, I think would be a good example, where a lot of their characters, I think, have the ability built in. So Tribe's Pride, that's Flurry. Where's Masteries? I know that there was something where they could still get Inimitable. It might be under Teachings of Conquest. Yeah, so you can still go Voice of Conquest to get Cult of Conquest for your Wadroon character. And Stoic is Indomitable. So these are the masteries that allow you to have something similar to what was possible with retinues. But now they're sort of just built in a different way. And they're also saying that you can use your physically purchased retinue models as various other things. I don't really like that. That's a bit more of a fix. I would have taken a different route. But I still respect what they're trying to do. They want to try and develop the game in a different direction. And as things continue to get added to the game, as rules continue to get tweaked, maybe they found it would have been easier to balance the game without retinues instead. So it's not the end of the world. I just didn't really feel that comfortable with it. So let's move on. Character stands, regiments, activations, and spellcasting. This is actually a big one because it means that when you activate a character, you can use the character's abilities, draw events, spells, whatever it might be, and then you can pick up the next card in your stack, and if it happens to be the regiment that character is part of, you can go ahead and activate that regiment anyway. And their thinking is that previously, you would activate a character somewhere early in your stack if you're going to cast a spell with it, like a Fireball from a Dwegum Sorcerer, and that would be what you'd be using it for. Otherwise, activating the character would often be a filler card where you're just trying to waste time and, burn your stack and get your opponent to play their regiments first, and that way you can do the more important activations later on. And the way they want to do it now is to give you the option of activating the character along with the unit so that you can actually pull off a bit more of a combo, or if you still want to have the character activating on its own just to waste time, then you can choose not to activate the next card if it happens to be the regiment, or you can just have the regiment elsewhere in the deck overall. And it's interesting because it results in some very powerful plays now where, looking at 100 Kingdoms, you can put the Theist Priest in with the Militia as you normally would, with Blessed and Elysian Fragment, and it now means the Priest can activate as your first activation top deck, put Blessed on the Militia, activate Elysian Fragment. You can then immediately activate the Militia and charge something, and you've got you've smite attacks, and you could be inflicting 15 plus auto wounding hits, then plus the priest's one as well, wiping something out. So that becomes very dangerous. I feel like that particular combo has been mitigated by their next upgrade, which means that the priest is no longer a medium character in a light regiment. It just becomes a light regiment with a light character in it. But coming back to character stands, there's a range of possibilities now. I'm also looking at characters like the Imperial Officer with Eye of Achilles and the draw events that buff a shooting unit. So you can activate the character first, buff the shooting unit, then activate the shooting unit immediately afterwards and do a whole lot of shooting. And overall, I kind of like this change because a lot of those combos just weren't quite strong enough to be really viable to begin with, and now they are. But they've also been mitigated somewhat by this character stands and class changes. And given that just about every faction has something nasty that it can do as far as that's concerned, I feel like we're still on a fairly even playing field. Their reasoning for doing this is that with the new faction Sorcerer Kings coming out, so many of the Sorcerer Kings characters have buff spells and buff abilities, and they wanted to make it so that activating the character card wasn't too much of a slowdown in tempo. For example, if you activate your character, you buff a unit, then your opponent activates their card, charges your unit, wipes them out, then effectively your character is doing very little there. And it needs to be more effective. So they're trying to get that kind of combo in the space where it's a bit more viable. It remains to be seen. I feel like worst case scenario, we're going to find that there are some combos that are just so strong that everybody gravitates towards them, and that's going to dominate list building. That's sort of worst case scenario. But best case scenario, we're going to see a lot of strategies being used that weren't used before this patch that are interesting and powerful and make the factions interesting and unique. I know that I'm personally going to be trying a bit more of the shooting version of the Imperial Officer, and I'll be continuing to use the Militia and the Priest, even though they can't score anymore, and that's going to change my lists around a little bit, but I will, show you guys some bat reps and show you guys how that goes. So as I said, that ties into character stands and class. So the thinking there is that previously you could take your Imperial Officer and your Imperial Rangers, like I always did in all of my bat reps, and vanguard them onto the field and basically start scoring as of turn 1. You absolutely cannot score on zones in turn 1 anymore, and that takes away a little bit from some 100 Kingdoms builds. It takes away a little bit from some Spies builds, I think. But that's probably a good thing. It now means that you've sort of got to contest the mid-game and late game like everybody else. It makes the matchup against Old Dominion a little bit harder than it previously was, but that's good. I felt like Old Dominion needed a little bit of a buff in that area anyway. It also makes list building a little bit more interesting and tight now that you kind of have to make some rough decisions about how many medium and heavy units you put in your list versus light units, rather than just taking the obvious light units, which would have medium characters in them. So yeah, it is a bit of a change. It's going to take a bit of playtesting, but overall, I agree with what they've done there, and I do feel like it was just a bit too cheeky and sneaky to be able to hack your medium character into a light unit in that way. Okay, dueling has changed quite significantly. I've thought about this, and this is a very interesting change. It does make dueling characters a little bit more relevant and interesting, and I kind of think they needed to be. Even though Nords had become souped up a bit for dueling, I still don't felt like dueling was relevant enough, and this kind of does make them relevant. And this also works in tandem with the activation change for characters as well. So if you think about it, let's say you've got your unit locked in with their regiment and there are characters in both regiments and you win the roll for supremacy. You can then pull out your character, which is tooled up for close combat. You can declare a duel. If they accept, you kill their character, and you can then activate your regiment and attack the enemy regiment that has now lost their character. But if they decline that duel because they want to keep their character, that enemy regiment is going to suffer the following penalties. They can't see zones. They use the lowest resolve characteristic, which is going to hurt when you're doing damage to them. They can't inspire when they attack back. They reroll resolve checks of 1, which is going to be very painful because you're going to be immediately attacking them with a regiment of your own. And this play becomes possible in the sense that normally your first card would be the regiment rather than the character, because you can't afford to be attacked rather than attack with your regiment. So it's now possible to pull that off, meaning that I'm going to be looking at dueling characters in a slightly different way. I'm also going to be seriously considering dueling upgrades for some of my characters, like Disorienting Strikes. So if we go and have a look at masteries, Disorienting Strikes is a very common one, and it's just -1 clash to your opponent's character. So taking that may mean that you can accept the duel, you don't lose your character, and your regiment's not going to suffer these penalties. So little upgrades like that went up in stock pretty heavily, but just generally speaking, yeah, taking a combat kitted character has a lot more application now if you can just get that regiment into contact with an enemy regiment that has a character in it, period. It's going to be pretty big. I think that this overall upgrade helps Old Dominion quite a lot, just partly because they've got great duelists, but because when you decline a duel, you don't really care about resolve, and you don't really care about respite anyway. So Old Dominion declining duels is not going to be as bad as being broken in some cases. Not seizing objectives could be a problem, but overall, I feel like it helps that faction the most. And I never felt like Old Dominion was crushing it in the meta anyway. I didn't feel like they were the top tier faction. So along with the other buffs that they're going to be getting, this is quite a nice, helpful thing for them. Okay, so a whole bunch of special rules have been updated as well. I'm not going to go through them all on this. We're seeing some just rewords on some things, so it's not like a drastic mechanical change in some cases. In other cases, yes, there are some changes, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on that in this video. Let's talk about the juicy stuff, though, which is the faction stuff. So, Spires. I'm not going to spend much time on Spires, just because this is probably the faction that I know the least about and have studied the least. Overall, one point that I will make is that I didn't see any changes to the character, Lineage Highborn, and that was one thing I had a bit of a beef with in terms of game design and the meta. So, Lineage Highborn can still go in a unit of Sentinels or Avatara, and it's still going to be, you know, when you're the Warlord Legacies of the Ark, it's going to mean that you can just immediately go for Cascading Degeneration, still give them all Aura of Death. You can go for Pheromantic Override, which is still going to give you that free activation kind of thing to move in or clash, and Command Pheromones is still going to be, you know, the go-to one for +1 resolve. Nothing about that got changed, which kind of annoyed me, because I felt like that was the one sort of impressive thing about Spires. They have moved the Biomancer stuff around a little bit, so what you can do is you can change a regiment to medium. I don't think they could do that before, so that's kind of interesting. They're playing around with objective zones and scoring a fair bit in this update. This one's interesting. Friendly regiments in range of an objective zone count as if they're in range for the Biomancies, so you can sort of target a friendly regiment on the other side of the table if they're in a zone. A lot of this other stuff I'm not going to comment on too much, because I can't tell you whether it's like a good or a bad change. I'm just going to assume that it's just a bit of a quality of life thing and you know, a good tweak. Seek New Escort has been removed. I don't know if we talked about that, by the way. That is one thing that kind of annoyed me a little bit, because I personally liked Seek New Escort. The thing about Seek New Escort that I did like was that it gave you the opportunity to build an army list around the concept of moving one character to another regiment that it could do a bit of a synergy with. So you might build a 100 Kings Sorcerer in such a way that you move it over to like Household Guards or to Steel Legion or something and heal them. Or you could have like a character that buffs a shooting unit. Again, like the Sorceress could go on Longbowmen if it seeks New Escort. Just little bits and pieces like that, and that made list building a bit more intriguing and gave a bit of room to somebody going, okay, I'm not going to play this faction the way that everybody else does it. I'm going to come up with a different plan and try and be a bit more individual. And now you can't really do that style of things, and it sort of makes list building a bit more homogenous and boring. I didn't particularly like that. I just feel like they've probably done that because there are some characters out there that they feel like would break the game if they did seek New Escort, and they just don't want that, and they want to sort of future-proof themselves from that and safeguard themselves. So that's why that's happened most likely, but of course the Mimetic Assassin being so reliant on Seek New Escort and having specific rules relating to it, they've had to ensure they continue to do that. I do like the fact that he can go in any regiment now, so that's kind of hilarious in terms of list building. Siegebreaker Behemoth, I don't know if this is an overall net positive or what, but I am told that it's generally better I can't remember what was said about that specifically, but Siege Breaker Behemoth, I think, has just been retooled slightly. Infiltrator variant, I see the word reduced there, coming down to 5. I know that everything about infiltrators and the character that led them was just just a little bit much, so any reduction there is nice. And a few other little limitations here. I don't feel like Spires is the story of the day, but again, what would I know? I don't really play Spires, so I think I'll leave you guys to sort of investigate that a bit more on Discord. Again, they're my least familiar faction. What I can tell you about is the other factions, though, so let's deal with some of the other ones. So, Wadroon. Wadroon was a bit of a problem. They've been nerfed quite heavily in this balance patch, and the Chieftain Supremacy was one of them. It was the most obvious supremacy. Everybody ran a Chieftain. You never even thought about taking one of the other characters. And the way that I proposed fixing that was to say, okay, instead of just doing shock all of the time to all of your regiments, let's say that you have a supremacy ability like normal where you pop it and use it for one turn, and for that turn it applies to the entire army. For the rest of the time it just applies to your warband. I suggested that fix because it would mean a little bit of skill and a bit of thinking, a bit of player performance in terms of, trying to get a feel for the game and picking the right turn to use it as an expansion. And then for the rest of the time it would just be warband, so it wouldn't be as quite oppressive, and you'd sometimes possibly consider a different character, but the chief would still be very powerful. The way they've done it is still pretty good. They're splitting it up so that the Foot Chief applies shock to just infantry and monsters, but if you take the Thunder Chief on the Triceratops, the cavalry and brute regiments get it instead. So I like the fact that it's been weakened, and I like the fact that it's just not so ubiquitous. And you might sometimes consider like a matriarch warlord instead sometimes. But what I don't like about it is that it means that your list building is now just going to focus on the types of regiments that shock applies to. So if I'm playing a Foot Chief, I'm going to be taking the veterans most likely, and braves and things like that. And I'm going to be taking Tauntaurs and Apex Riders. And to be honest, that's sort of the way that those lists might go, because shock's very, very useful. If I'm taking a Thunder Chief, I'm probably going to be taking a couple of units of Thunder Riders and Warbred and things like that, and I'm going to be minimizing the reliance on things that don't get shock, like the infantry, etc., and monsters. So I feel like what that's going to mean is that list building is going to get a little bit more boring, a little bit more solved for the Chieftain. I would have preferred to keep the buff applicable for a lot of stuff that you could potentially take, but just tone it down a little bit. I don't like the prospect that it may affect your decisions about what's going to work with it, and really only taking some units rather than others for your chief. Cool. Predator gets a little bit more there. The forward force, I believe, is flank, but he's 10 more points. I don't know about that. The Predator, I don't really felt like he needed too many changes there. +1 attack is nice. The Scion, so the big story of the day here is that he doesn't really have the same crescendo combination with the Chosen of Conquest. But the thing is that the game's changing to have that double activation anyway. And this is a thing with Wadroon now, where previously what you do is you draw your Chief card or your Scion card or whatever, and you create a chant marker, which can never blow your chant tokens. You just add it to the stack, and you can't lose the tokens because the character itself can't chant the battle cry. It can only add the token. Whereas now what can happen is you activate your chief or your queen or your scion, they add a token to the stack, and then they can automatically activate the regiment that they are with, which itself adds another token, and then they can chant it. So it's a very easy way of using the Wadroon chants now. Let's say, for example, you start the turn and your Thunder Chief activates, chants for war. Then you activate your Thunder Riders next, which you can do automatically without your opponent having a turn, and they also chant for war, and then you charge with your Thunder Riders. They have tier 1 of war, which is +1 defense, which is amazing for them. If they have Mantle of the Devoted, which will still work on Thunder Riders, by the way, they are tier 3 effectively, and they will have Blessed and Cleave 1, and it's just a bit nutty. And similarly, with the Scion, you can have the Scion in a unit of Chosen of Conquest, and by my reading of it, it's still pretty easy. You activate the Scion, a chant for Conquest, or whatever, marker you're going to get, and then immediately activate the Chosen. They go straight to tier 3 because they are fanatics, and they can just go across the board and do things very easily. So not only can you do all of that, but you're going to be able to put one of these spells out there in terms of affecting enemy regiments, or doing this thing here where you reorder your command stack. So it's not too much different, but overall it's just a slight buff to the Scion, and I just feel like it's going to be used in exactly the same way that he previously was. That's sort of my feeling about it, but we'll see. All Wadroon characters, as we talked about earlier, can still have Indomitable for 10 points, which is something you could with a retinue before, and belonging to Cult of Conquest if you really want. Not massive. I do feel a bit jealous, though, because as a 100 Kingdoms player and Dwergum, I kind of would have liked to keep having Indomitable as well, since it's just such a useful rule. Warbred, losing Burnout, that sort of makes sense because Burnout does get pretty nasty when you're also getting Shock, and you're also getting Inspired, and you're also chanting for death or something like that. So that's pretty good, but I think to compensate from that, they are making them better in terms of wounds and points, so fair enough. Predator looks like he's getting a buff. I don't remember him being March 8, so I think he's speedier now, and I think he's gone up in terms of wounds, so that's kind of crazy. I thought the Predator was fine. Especially with the character riding him with the Bastion ability, so I did think that was pretty good. I don't know. I mean, how did you guys find him in playtesting? I thought the Predator was okay. The Tauntaur was one of our top 5 things that needed to be changed in the game. They've made it slightly more expensive as far as I can tell, and it now has Trample 8 instead of 10. I don't think that's enough of a nerf, to be honest. I think that the Tauntaur is still extremely powerful. The other thing about it is that the Mantle of Conquest Mantle of the Devoted can't be used on monsters, so that's the other part of the nerf. So maybe we're okay now, but I think if I'm a Wadroon player, I'd still be using a Tauntaur because it can still chant for Conquest. It can still, it's still just as tough as it was before. It can still easily get into combat, cause a bunch of damage with Impact and Trample. Next turn, it can't get killed, and then you just attack and you just wipe out something, and then it's probably still going to live to face another unit after that. So pretty crazy. Hunting Pack, I believe the points have gone down a little bit. They're very squishy and they're quite hard to use, so I'm not too sure if that is a buff. Hunters, I'm seeing loose formation there. That makes them great at doing a shootout with an enemy unit because it means they're going to take half shots. So they're just a really good anti-shooting unit. Really good for going up against a unit of Bow Chosen or something else now. That's quite useful. Braves apparently more expensive. I kind of agree with that because Braves with Queen, it's a very good combo. You can easily give them Fanatic. They can be very tough if you want them to be. Bloodlust doesn't matter that much. It's quite easy to keep in check, and you're mostly going to be charging anyway, and the free heal on the Braves with the Queen is very strong. Not too sure what changed with veterans. I'm not too sure what they were before. Standard Bearer Free's quite nice. Mantle of the Devoted, as we talked about, it's infantry regiment. Okay, so minor correction there. I said that the Thunder Riders can get it. Now they can't, so that's actually even more of a nerf than I thought. It's still very strong. I mean, I personally would take the Mantle of the Devoted in every Wadroon list. I just feel like it's going to be a bit more boring now because you're probably going to have it on the Queen almost always. Maybe the veterans and the chief, but mostly the Queen and the Braves, I reckon. So who knows? Maybe this is going to mean that Wadroon lists get a little bit more boring, but I think we're going to have to wait and see for that one. They have definitely been nerfed. Overall, Wadroon have come down a peg pretty hard. It sounds like they're going to be kind of mid-tier, whereas previously they were one of the best factions. Speaking of nerfs, we have another round of nerfs for Dwergum. I really have to sort of say that Dwergum overall have been nerfed here because the Temperate Sorcerer is more expensive now. The Magma spells have been tweaked downwards a little bit. The Curryweg has been buffed, so yeah, he's got slightly better utility in spells, and you can at least activate him first and then activate the unit, so he's become better. but not really good enough to make that the focus of your army, in my opinion. You still want to be using Tempered Creed just because of those little cheat tokens you get where you can auto-pass a defense roll. They're just too important not to use. They've buffed the Rhaeg as well, but again, they haven't buffed him enough to want to take him as a warlord. So overall, the playstyle of Dweghom hasn't really been fixed. But they've just reduced the sort of tournament-winning variety of Dweghom, where it's sort of like if you want to be competitive with them, you've been taken down a peg, and they haven't really been made more interesting in the process. So I'm kind of disappointed with the Dweghom changes. I think that the Wadroon changes are on point. They've made them very fair, and they've kind of kept them interesting. But the Dweghom changes are not great. I look at my collection of models, and I was hoping to be inspired to build a few different styles of list, but I'm going to go back to the exact same thing, where it's like 2 sorcerers. One of them is going to be on the Drake. I'm going to have a bunch of initiates with the Rhaeg there, and I'm going to have the Steel Shaper still in there. I'm going to try and build up a lot of tokens, and I'm going to try and have a gun line. And I just kind of feel bad for Dweghom at this point. They kind of needed a bit more of a stylistic update as opposed to just some tweaks. But hey, they did win the Las Vegas Open or whatever that was recently. They're still extremely strong, and seeing their spells tweaked ever so slightly downwards, and the problem character of the Sorcerer just being slightly more expensive. They're better than what they were. I prefer this to no changes at all. Old Dominion is a faction that got a bunch of buffs. I personally had them probably as the 3rd to worst or 2nd to worst faction in the game in the previous patch. They feel like they've gone up in value now. Let's go through it. So, Supremacy, they get 1 token per turn regardless of whether your Warlord's on the table. Previously, you needed the Warlord on the table. And their reinforcement become more effective now. You get +1 to your rolls. This sort of addresses one problem they had where you mostly want to take mediums. They're not really a light regiment sort of faction, especially with a limited catalog right now with no acolytes, etc. No centaurs. So what I was finding is that people were basically getting nothing done in turns 1 and 2. The Warlord eventually shows up. You start shambling towards the objectives. Your opponent's way ahead on points, and they just need to hold out. So by the time turn 7 or 8 rolls around, if you haven't done enough damage, the Old Dominion player loses. This pulls them back a little bit, meaning you can get into the mid-game a bit faster with your reinforcements, and you get to Dark Power Tier 2 a bit quicker. The regeneration buff is nice, especially with a lot more duels going to be happening in the game with duels changes, but overall that's not a significant one. This is not massively significant, but it is helpful. I still feel, though, that Old Dominion will be a matter of mostly running the Strategos, on the Mounted Strategos, that is, and the Exiliarch, and really going for big plays with his Supremacy turn, and it will be less about the Blasphemous Soma build-up. Having said that, they've made some changes to Legionnaires as well, so that's a little bit different too. Yeah, I still do feel like the Strategos and the Exiliarch are the way to go, especially with Dark Power Tier 4. If we are going to be ramping up a bit more quickly with Legionnaires dying faster and Blasphemous Soma kind of kicking in earlier, then getting to Tier 4 is going to happen earlier as well. Few changes to Fallen Divinity. Sounds like they are buffing it a little bit. I see March 5 instead of like March 4 for Tier 1, so that's probably a pretty big one. I know that our homeboy managed to get a very high result at Canberra, at CanCon, and yeah, props to him. I feel like that result was less to do with the Fallen Divinity and more to do with that particular player being experienced at the game and most of the Australian meta being new. Like, most of that field being people who were new to the game, not much experience, so the few people who had played a lot of games are naturally going to get to the end there. We're not seeing a lot of Fallen Divinity in any other sort of event around the world, and we certainly weren't in the last patch. I personally felt like it needed a bit of a buff. The way that I would help out the Fallen Divinity is less so with the actual model itself and more with its army list options, and I would have other things happening to make it more interesting to play and build around, and that was my suggestion in my wish list video, and I said that they haven't taken that route, which is a little bit disappointing. The Mounted Strategos, Cataphractoi become mainstay. That's amazing. Previously, you sort of had to take a unit of Legionnaires, and since we don't have any Centaurs yet, being able to build a mainstay Mounted Strategos is awesome with the Cataphractoi there. So I just think that's just a great change. It really helps the Mounted Strategos and makes that an amazing Warlord pick. Infantry version, so you can have a light version, bring them in a bit more quickly. So I guess you could even do that with Praetorians, which is pretty cool. So I love that change. The Auxiliarch looks like he's become a little bit punchier in close combat. I think this is just purely because you can't take the retinue upgrades for him anymore, so they want to build in a bit more punch to him. So he's going to be an absolute pain to deal with in terms of the new dueling rules, where you just activate the Auxiliarch first, he duels you, you decline, then the Varangian Guards start punching you, or the Praetorian Guards, immediately before you can activate. That's going to be extremely dangerous. Archimandrite Baptism doesn't have scaling, that's really helpful. The Hierodeacon no longer has the spell which gives you more dark power. Interesting. I guess that's sort of rolling it back the other way, where previously you had this little factory where you're just using the Hierodeacon to generate dark power only, and now you get dark power a lot more quickly early in the game. So I guess that moves it back the other way. The thing that interests me more is that he's gained this ability where you can put Blessed on a brute unit. That's going to be absolutely brutal, no pun intended, on things like the Bone Golems, which are already tough enough. Now they get Blessed, so that's painful. We also saw that Bucephaloi became tougher, and with the combination on Blessed, suddenly we might start seeing Bucephaloi, and we really needed to see some movement there, so I'm very happy about the possibility of that. They're awesome models. A bit of love for the unreleased human units, Cultists and Hashashins. You can get dark power out of them with this spell now. So that, I think, gives a bit of incentive to people to run them once they get released. So hopefully that's an indication that they might be coming out soon. Definitely hoping for that. All right, some of the upgrades just being reworked to factor in that there's no retinues available anymore, so they have to just reword a few things like that. Athanatoi being buffed, that's important. Parry is much better than counterattack. Athanatoi with the weakest unit in the faction, seeing some love there just shows that the designers know what they're talking about, so I'm happy to see that. A bit Bucephaloi buffed. Varangians, the most powerful regiment in the faction, nerfed. 6 wounds down to 5. Thank God. I think that's a very fair change, and I think people will still use Varangian Guards. So with all of the other buffs that Old Dominion have taken, shaving the most powerful regiment down is great, because it means that the meta sort of build of just going Auxiliarch and Varangian Guards and Praetorian Guards, that kind of build has been shaved down a little bit with the Varangian Guard change, but still strong, but still viable because of the other benefits of playing Old Dominion at the moment. Legionnaires completely reworked. Well, not completely, but the whole, I mean, they've even put in a whole paragraph here from Leo about the idea. You know, you want to take them to score or to sacrifice them for dark power, and your opponent will have to make a choice between killing them and giving you dark power, or leaving them alone and you just score. So they've made them a bit faster, easy to get there, and they seem to be a bit cheaper now. So I think that's kind of cool. They're the sort of unit that everybody who plays Old Dominion has to buy and assemble and field. There's no way around it. So making them a bit more streamlined and useful in that regard, rather than just being this crappy auto-include, I think that's good. So props to them for addressing that. Carries, this is interesting because I think they've just sort of flattened them out a bit, making it so that no matter what tier you're in, you get the benefits of this bonus here, but the tier does affect how much additional damage this is going to do when you fail resolves on 6s. I'm kind of scared of this unit. If you take 4 of them and, you know, you just start shooting that insanity spell on things, that does cause a lot of hits, and if you roll a lot of 6s for resolve, that's a lot of wounds you're going to be suffering. So I personally would still continue to take the carries. I feel like what they're doing there is they're making the carries slightly less reliant on dark power tiers. That feels to be what's happening here, but you still benefit quite a lot from souping them up with the Archimandrites, blasphemous power kind of thing. So there is that. Overall, great changes to Old Dominion. Can't wait to see them on the field a bit more, and they still do need the Centaurs and the Acolytes to come out. That's going to help list building quite a lot, but the changes we've seen here have been great. My recommendation was to give them some mastery abilities, turning the Archimandrite or the Hierodeacon into Brute so they could join Brute units. That would have been really cool to see, but I don't think they're going to be doing anything like that. 100 Kingdoms, my fave faction here. So the Imperial Officer has been nerfed, thank God. That was really called for. It was way too powerful. They've toned it down a little bit by, making it more like the Shaman's old ability where you choose up to 2 units to have it affected. Still only infantry though, which is great. I feel like, there were some people who were talking about doing these goblin builds where you took like 20 activations or activations where it was just purely crossbows. And this change weakens that, thank goodness. There's nothing worse than marching on with like 6 units of crossbowmen and they all go up 15 inches, they can shoot next turn. This makes that less doable now because they're going to be a lot slower at getting into position. And you might sometimes consider a list where you don't have an Imperial Officer as a Warlord, which is more interesting for list building, so I love that. The officer now gets flank on something, which is kind of cool. If you're going to add him to your Steel Legion and have Bastion or something there, that's great. Up to 2 heirlooms means that he can potentially give your Bastion, if you're talking about like Steel Legion or Gilded Legion, you could be giving them the Standard of Steel, which has Dread. You get rid of Inspired on the enemy unit, and Armor of Dominion, and he has Bastion, so that makes him extremely defensive. If you want to build that with 2 heirlooms, it's kind of cool. I will be looking at trying him out with the Rangers, except instead of scoring, I'm going to go for the shooting where his Eye of Achilles activates, puts that on them, then they activate automatically, and then they start shooting with the reroll 6s, and he'll have the draw event on them for the fire and advance or the aim for the eyes kind of thing, so we'll be giving that a go. Noble Lord Supremacy increases to 8 inches range, not enough in my opinion, so that's still a little bit too weak, but they're giving him some other stuff here where he gets some weapons arts changes. There is one option where you can take +1 Clash. I quite like that for the Noble Lord on the horse because the Clash will now affect his impact hits. So in my build, I'll be taking the Noble Lord on the horse with the duelist ability, not for fighting in duels, although he could be doing it that way. I'll be foregoing the cleave, which is normally the go-to upgrade, but the Clash will give him maybe the occasional additional success on his impact hits, which is very important if he's in a unit of knights with Oliphant's Roar for Glorious Charge. Powerful Physique, that's kind of nice. Tenacious Ability instead, so that's quite good. That's moving one of the upgrades to his natural sort of options there. What do you even call that? If we just go into factions here for 100 Kingdoms, how have they worked it out? So Noble Lord, Graceful Combatant is attacks, Powerful Physique is changed to Tenacious. That used to be like +1 wound or something like that, is how they've done it. The Mage has got a couple of additional things that they can do, and this is sort of running with the whole theme of, you activate a spellcaster, you normally wouldn't want to do that if it's in place of activating a regiment. So they've changed the rules, so you activate, cast your buff spell, then you activate the regiment immediately afterwards. This is a big change for Sorcerer Kings because they're going to use that a lot, but with your Mage, you can now have the Elemental Vortex if you're expecting the enemy to blast you with a spell. I just don't feel like that's going to happen very much because the whole spell blasting meta is going to be coming down a little bit. I suppose if you're up against Old Dominion and your enemy has a tooled up Archimandrite tier 3 which is about to absolutely zap you, you could put the Vortex on. Or for example, Keres, if they're just going to shoot you, or maybe one of the Titans from City States, you could have that option. The Elemental Missile, that's pretty short range, so you've got to get it quite close for that to work. But overall, the rest of her spells kind of unchanged. The tiers are a little bit different, but I'm kind of concerned about the Earth list here. School of Earth still unchanged. I still feel like these aren't particularly great Because if you take School of Earth in army building stage and you don't get to activate before your opponent does the clutch thing, it just does nothing. So I felt like that still needed some love. Centric fighting style doesn't need retinue. Okay, these have been changed because retinue's changed. Hunter Cadra, I can't remember whether that points have gone up or down, but I didn't really run a lot of them anyway. Crimson Tower wounds 5. So this is the one thing where I actually made that specific recommendation, and I said, hey, other people will say reduce their points. I particularly think that the problem is their stickability. I'm wondering if somebody from Parabellum watched my wishlist video and thought, aha, VaulSC, my boy, you are correct, so we're going to do exactly that, and they've gone ahead and given wounds 5 to Crimson Tower. I think this is a good buff. It doesn't make them too powerful. It helps them to be something you'd now consider. I'm going to give them a bit more playtime to celebrate. I've been using my Order of the Sword. Nope, we're going to go Crimson Tower for a little while. I do want to go back to to Order of the Sword, by the way, just because of the new dueling rules. It's going to make it's going to be harder to get that character working without his retinue bonuses, but with a sword in there, I think it's going to be nice. But before then, Crimson Tower, that's going to be my next list. Sealed Temple have gone up in points, 170 up to 190. Some people think that they are still too cheap just because of the reform. I feel like at 190 points, it is a bit of a risk, because if you're just going to take the frontal assault route, there are going to be a lot of games where they just don't get 190 points worth of stuff. Like, they may charge something that's worth 150, they do a bunch of damage, they don't kill the unit, you lose your Sealed Temple. Those are points down the drain. To get the points out of them, you really need to be using your free reform from Liquid Formation and dancing around the battlefield and getting flank charges and being a nuisance. They're such a fast regiment, and of course the character in them is going to benefit from the free reform as well. So they're still very, very good. Looking forward to seeing how the meta adapts to them later on. When we first had the spoilers the other week about the changes, I didn't know if they were going to go up in points. So I was thinking about buying 2 boxes of them, and I would have if they'd stayed at 170 points. So I hope that Parabellum aren't going to take that to heart and buff units just so that I spend money on them. I hate it when companies do that. I'll be continuing to spend money on Conquest, not because the units are powerful, but because the game is balanced. That is the main thing to keep in mind. Ashen Dawn, the most powerful regiment in the game in the last patch. Remove Wedge, that is important. They needed at least something to like shave off the power level. And 80 points per stand, up from 70 from the additional stand, but no changes to the base regiment. I think that is smart because it really only affects that sort of egregious medalist of 5 stands over 2 regiments that wins tournaments and so forth. That particular list has been nerfed by 40 points, whereas if you still want to use your box of 3 Ashen Dawn, there is no points change, and you're only having to give up +1 cleave from the charge. Ashen Dawn, I think, are still the best regiment in the faction. I'm still going to be taking 3 of them. I think that they're absolutely amazing, and in the long run, they'll probably see some more nerfs. And with other things in the meta being addressed and other factions being taken down a peg, I'll be relying on Ashen Dawn possibly even more than previously. So yeah, there are a couple of builds that I'm looking at here. Ashen Dawn, 2 units of them plus 2 Crimson Towers, or 2 Sealed Temples and 2 Ashen Dawn. That could be the next meta for 100 Kingdoms if my predictions are accurate. So Nords, character retinue, instead of having to pay for it, you just get +1 attack. Nords are going to love duels even more thanks to the changes. I think that if you want to run your Konungur or your Jarl or something like that, and like march charge into something and duel next turn, that's going to be even more effective. But I'm not too worried about it because it wasn't really very effective to begin with, and Nords players were sort of crutching on the shaman a lot and using monsters more often. So because the Nord characters for combat were kind of weak to begin with, based on list building, based on warband availability and so forth, I don't think we're going to see too much trouble out of them. Speaking of Shaman, the Call of the Storm, which gives Vanguard to 2 regiments per turn, can't be used on monsters anymore. That is a great nerf to Nords. It was like the one thing that they were sort of crutching on too hard. Now they're going to have to look around for other things in the faction that have been buffed to try and build lists around, rather than just trying to build tournament-winning lists around like C, Jotnars. So it's overall a good change. I really like that. And when you look at the other stuff here, like the Volva buff and some of the other things that have been happening here, that's been amazing. The one thing I can't understand, though, is the Gothy. So previously, what you could do is you could go to your Bear Sucks, which are a really powerful unit, not overpowered in my opinion. And what you would do is you go, all right, grab me a Shaman, grab me some Raiders, and grab me some Bear Sarks, and make them a nice big fat unit of 4. Command Bearer, you want the Standard Bearer because they've got Bloodlust. And what you'd want to do is you'd want to march them onto the table with Vanguard from the Supremacy ability, from the Shaman. And then you want to charge something, and then you want to clash, because Bloodlust allows you to clash and charge on the same turn that you came onto the table. Now they can't have the Gothy, so they can't have Blessed, which is insane to me, because they really kind of needed it for defense. Now they're going to really crumble pretty hard against a unit that sort of gets the jump on them. Even like a really basic unit that just attacks them, like a unit of Blooded or something like that, even like Household Guard, you know, are just going to shred them without that blessed upgrade. And against a really clutch target where they need like one turn to do absolutely as much damage as possible, and they're using Blessed on the attacks, doesn't work now. And there's been no change to their points, which is weird. Ulfednar have been buffed here, but again, I assume that Ulfednar don't actually get to use the Gothy either. So what are you doing, Parabellum? I thought that these guys needed buffs rather than nerfs, and not having the Gothy seems like a straight-up nerf. Tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, but that just seems wrong to me. All Jotnar to 16 wounds, amazing. That's going to make them much scarier. And even the Jotnar, which was arguably quite powerful as it is, 16 makes it much tougher. I do feel like the basic Mountain Jotnar needed that, and the very expensive Ice Jotnar definitely needed that as well. So Nords going up a peg. Some people felt like they were like top tier kind of faction. I thought they were near the bottom, but I think we can now agree that Nords are much better balanced relative to other factions, regardless of where you sat. Because if you were saying, oh yep, they're a really powerful faction at the moment, you were probably saying that because of this Call the Storm Vanguard on monsters. But now it's a matter of monsters showing up, you know, more slowly but having more wounds. So I think they're just fairer as a faction overall. City-states. So the thing here is that they have effectively been buffed because so many of their regiments have gone down in points. So that's something we really wanted to see. The Titans have actually become tougher with 16 wounds. So many of these changes are absolutely sensible. I'm not going to go into detail about their upgrades and their magic items, just since I don't really understand them that well and I haven't really researched them. But all you really need to know as a casual player is that if you bought boxes and boxes and boxes of city-states and you're assembling them, and people were then telling you, oh, this is the worst faction in the game, Parabellum realizes that. Like, unlike Games Workshop or Corvus Belli or any other games developer out there, the people making this game realize that playing a faction, the power level matters, and your competitiveness in terms of the meta and playing with your friends in tournaments, that matters to people who are buying their miniatures and assembling them and painting them. That really is important. And when I was playing against city-states in the last patch, and I played a lot of games against city-states, I was winning almost every game very easily because all of their units were overcosted. And even if city-states don't immediately go up to like top tier best in the game, they're going to be more competitive and more viable now, and games against them and with them as them are going to be more interesting as a result. So just couldn't be happier with that update overall. All right, guys, I think I want to end it there. As I said, just stoked with this patch. I can't wait to get in some more games. I think that overall the meta is going to be a lot fairer, faction balance better. Even internal faction balance is going to be quite good. So if you have any thoughts, leave me a comment. Please do like and subscribe and hit the bell notification, and keep an eye out for my other content. I'll be playing a game with 100 Kingdoms as soon as possible to make use of some of the new abilities, and I'll be celebrating with a regiment of Crimson Tower Knights, of course. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and I'll see you there.